I could have been Anita Hill. When I was a sophomore, just out of my sophomore year in college, my father was a general in the Army and very close friends with Senator Barry Goldwater, and through him I met Senator John Tower from Texas, who was a very powerful senator in Washington. And John Tower showed an interest in me and my studies, and I was a theater major, and asked me to have lunch with him at the Senate dining room. And I thought, well, isn't that nice? He's a friend of Daddy's and Barry's. And the day of the dinner, he called the lunch and said he couldn't make it. There were hearings. Could I have dinner? And I sort of felt a little creepy about it. But then I thought, if I say no, he's going to think that I think that he thinks that I think something. So I said yes.
We all understood that, yes.
He went to this French restaurant, and he started trying to hold my hand, and he was drinking heavily, and I was really upset and really nervous. I didn't know how to handle it. We got out of the restaurant. I said, I've got to go home early. I tried to hail a cab. He grabbed my arm and dragged me across the street to this French little, called the Espionage, a little bar, up the stairs. I mean, literally grabbed me. I might have bruises on my arm from this. Up the stairs, ordered a brandy, and by this time he's all over me, and I was just crazed. I was so scared. I didn't know what to do. I said, I have to leave. I went downstairs, I hailed a cab, and he lived on Capitol Hill. I lived at Fort Myer, Virginia, and I said, no need for you to come. No, I want to come. I want to escort you home. He jumped in the cab, threw me down on the back seat, and proceeded to try to undress me, and literally was trying to have sex with me. And the poor cab driver was this little old black guy, and all he could hear was me screaming, Senator, Senator, and him sort of moaning in Southern accent. So he went like 100 miles an hour. I mean, the car was going around that, and he pulled up in front of my father's quarters. And by this time, I mean, he was really trying to rip my clothes off, and he was on top of me, and he was trying to undress himself, and it was just, I was hysterical. And the cab driver pulled to a halt, got out, opened the door, and said, we're here, ma'am. And I jumped out of the car, and I think he was afraid that the general would come out, or the military police or something, and he finally, sort of pulled himself, and I had to get back dressed again, ran up to the door, let myself in, cried all night long, and never told anybody.
And then?
Never told anybody for several years, and finally I told my mother and my parents.
But that's not the end of the story.
That's not the end of the story. What happened was, he became head of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and then retired, and then he was nominated by George Bush Sr. to be the Secretary of Defense. And so they were having hearings on Capitol Hill, and one day I got the doorbell rang, and there were these two guys from the FBI, and they came in, and I let them in the hallway. At this point, I was married to the editor of the Washington Post. And they said, we have understand that there's a story that Senator Tower tried to rape you. And that's a word that I have a really hard time with, I mean, I say sexual assault. They said rape, and I wouldn't confirm it. And I said, I'm not discussing this. And they said, why not? I said, because I'm just not. They said, but this is all totally confidential. And I burst out laughing, and I said, are you kidding me? How do you think that we at the Washington Post get all of our stories? It's from leaks from people like you. That's where we get our stories. And I wouldn't budge. But there were plenty of women coming forward because he was a womanizer, and he also drank too much, and also there were other financial scandals. But the fact was that I didn't talk, but that in this he lost. He lost the job, was turned down, and one of the women, who was a Senator, Nancy Kassebaum, I was told later, voted against him because she had heard my story. And she said, we can't have somebody like that as Secretary of Defense. But the fact is, 2 years later, the Anita Hill thing happened.
Wow.
And all I could think about when I was watching that on television was that could have been me. Because if I had told them, they would have subpoenaed me. And that's one of the reasons that I feel so strongly about her. And what I was saying to Carrie earlier is, she didn't ask for this. They called her and asked her, and she didn't know any better than to say, I'm not going to talk to you about this. And then she believed them when they said it would be confidential. And so, I mean, why would she make up a story like this when she thought it would be confidential, when she never even thought for a second that she would end up in front of a Senate hearing?
Sally, first of all, I think on behalf of everyone, thank you for sharing the story. As you said to me on the phone the other day, everybody's dead. So
they're all dead. I'm older. But the fact is, I still, when I'm still thinking about it, I still get upset, and I'm still humiliated, and I still feel enormous amount of guilt. And I was telling some young college girls about this story the other night at dinner, and they said to me, why did you let him get in the cab? And it was somehow my fault. I had let him get in the cab, but I didn't. He jumped in the cab. I mean, all the way through. And I keep, even now, saying, why did I have dinner with him? Why didn't I just not have dinner? Why did I go to the restaurant? Why did I let him take me to the bar? Why did I get in the cab? It was my fault somehow. And I'm still upset about it.
Thank you.
Well, this is why it's so important that we're having this conversation, because these ideas are so pervasive, and this idea that it's okay to blame yourself for an attempted rape or sexual assault, the idea that it's okay to victimize a victim when they come forward, these are things we have to be talking about and processing and exorcising.
Absolutely.